Thank you all so much for watching the film, and I'd like to now introduce you to the writer-director, Milcho Manchevski. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to
My
have you
pleasure.
here. Um, and I'd love to start by talking about the folklore in the film, to maybe go a little bit behind the scenes of where the inspiration for the first part of the film came from.
Well, I mean, you got it on the head. The folklore, and especially the historical folklore, was the initial inspiration for the film, and everything else, including the motherhood story, came later. So I just had this um, sort of soft, foggy idea of trying to learn and delve into historical folklore, medieval folklore in Macedonia, which is, not, um, we don't know that much about it. It hasn't been that well researched, but what is available is really interesting. There's a lot of pagan and early Christian in medieval Macedonia, overlapping later on with Islamic influences. So the idea was um, to go there, to explore, and to find stories that have come out of the folklore. And often that means working with archetypes. So the first story is basically um, a retelling of several archetypes which are present in different cultures, even not just in Macedonia. So a lot of research went into that, which I loved. I love research almost as much as I like directing, sometimes even more. Um, so some books, some field work. We had three anthropology and history professors who advised us on the film. And pretty much everything you see there, every line or gesture, except for the central scene under the willow tree, um, when they try to conceive, everything is based on research, something that we've read. Things like you don't kiss your elder's hand over a threshold, etc., etc. Yeah.
Wonderful. What was some of the field work like? I mean, are you also getting anything passed down as sort of oral tradition from people that you met?
Yeah, a lot of it was field work that people in the College of Anthropology did, but I did some on my own, just basically talking to people in remote parts of the country. People who live in isolated villages. Of course, it's not going to be the same as what people were experiencing or thinking about 6, 7, 800 years ago, but it's certainly going to give you sort of a direction, and it's already different enough from the way city folks think, and it opens up your eyes to the difference in the concept of how things go.
Mm. Um, so if the beginning part of the film was really what had sort of gotten you on the path of writing it, at what point did you decide that this was going to be a juxtaposition of these sort of the tradition from the past and the ways in which, in contemporary society, we still struggle with a lot of issues regarding pregnancies? And I mean, when did you decide that that second half of the story was going to come into existence?
Quite early on. I mean, and I see that as a pattern in my thinking, in my writing. It was the same thing with Dust, with Before the Rain, where I start with one story or one setting or one taste, one mood, and then I realize that it's not enough. I want something to juxtapose it with. something to contrast it with, something to complement it with. And I feel that when you put two different things together, they are both better off in the end,
Mm,
because you see the contrasts, you also see the similarities,
similarities, yeah.
and it keeps you more awake as a filmmaker, as an artist, but it also, I believe, keeps the viewer more engaged
Mhm.
when they start putting together the connections and the contrasts between the two. So it was quite early on that I decided it needed to be mirrored by a similar situation with contemporary people. Ultimately, we usually come to a conclusion that people are people. They're always, the same. We have similar joys and similar sorrows, regardless of the century or the continent. And so at first it was a mirror situation. It was a diptych,
Mm,
and eventually it developed into an asymmetrical triptych,
mhm.
where a lot of the things are just echoes and rhymes rather than direct narrative links between the three parts.
Mm. As someone who's sort of currently in trying to also have a child, the film spoke to me in many ways as to how we put our faith now in science, but there's really despite so much progress, there is still that X factor to the miracle of life that
Yeah.
whether it's following superstition in hundreds of years ago, or now expecting to be able to um, make something happen scientifically, and yet when it doesn't, it's sort of what is there's still that mystery of life that we will never really understand. And I'm curious to know a little bit about writing the let's say the first of the two contemporary stories, um, because that's one that really does sort of go down a similar path of, like, replacing superstition with science, but still having as much struggle as we see in the first part of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's the magic and the mystery and the beauty of writing for me. I like writing better than directing, um, because I guess I feel more free. There's more freedom when you're writing, and my process is that I sort of follow the story, and I tease it to go into unexpected directions, take unexpected turns, and then see what happens. Which is what how that second story developed. It was like, so what if she meets him under these circumstances, and what if then they have this problem with the pregnancy. Um, I guess people have already seen the film, so we can have spoiler alerts. We don't have to have spoiler alerts. At one point, while toying with the story, was like, so what if they're twins? Okay, it's like, and I was working with a director friend in New York who teaches at Columbia. It was like, okay, maybe we should make them twins. Um, but a lot of it was just sort of letting the story take over, and then again doing a lot of research. It turned out that there were a lot of people whom I knew, and I didn't know that they were struggling with conceiving. And once they heard of the story, they opened up and we talked about it, and I did a lot of research. And there are some lines that are like literally um, stolen from life, and have become part of the film. And then, on one hand, uh, I like playing with the structure and how the second story works with the third story, and how the third story picks up, starts before the second one, but ends after it, and how it takes you in a different direction. So that's all that structural playing, structural game, which is a lot of fun. On the other hand, and it's like sort of the other end of the spectrum, they're just like the simple, emotional, even sentimental elements, aspects to the story, understanding the characters and understanding their pain, and focusing on that. So doing those two things at the same time is, for me, the real goal or the real fun of making a film.
I have to say, since we're not worried about spoilers here, I want I want to talk about the incredible feeling of relief that the adopted child is alive, because there's such a tremendous sense of loss and grief with the child's with the death of both the child in the beginning and then the twins. Um, and I think that you earn that by basically setting up an expectation within the audience that this could happen to this child as well. You talk a little bit about the decision for the children to die in the first two segments, or the in the first part, and then
It sort of, the story wanted to go that way. Particularly the first story, it's, I experienced it as a fairy tale, or as an archetypal story, which I'm sure I must have heard at some point in life, and just reworked in this one, even though I'm not really conscious of where I would have heard it, but it just sounds to me like something. Um, and then the second story also, it sort of wanted to go that way. And then the third one was where I put my finger on the scale, where I wanted a happy ending. I wanted all these people on the screen, and the people in the audience to walk out with a bit of a smile, with relief, with like, okay, life is good. Life is, in spite of all the pain, in spite of all the drama, it's really worth experiencing. Um, so yeah, in the first two stories, it was like sort of natural, like a natural tragedy. I guess to me, writing a tragedy comes natural. But then in the third one, I was really focusing, and a lot of it was not spoken. I mean, on paper, you didn't really see that much, but I knew that when we were going to see it on the screen, it was going to feel big, and you were going to feel the relief. Especially since the third part is so much shorter. It's smaller, it's more compact, and it's in so many ways, I feel it's more complex, both in terms of emotions and in terms of how it works within the structure of the story. So you start archetypal, then you go to something sort of realistic, and then you end with something that's yet a little more complex than either of the first two parts.
um, I was struck by how unusual and quite frankly lovely the love story was in the beginning of the second episode. The unusual way that they met, the way that unfolded. So we've talked a lot about folklore, but this is more sort of observation of human nature from a little bit of a different angle. Can you talk about writing this love story?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's folklore. It's just contemporary folklore,
Yeah.
in a way. Um, I have this dialogue with reality and with the documentary, quote unquote, in film. When I was in film school, I really didn't like documentaries. I felt they were getting too much praise. Um, I felt like they were getting the praise because of the subject matter
Mm,
rather than because of the filmmaking craft. This was a long time ago. I've learned that things are a little more complex now. Um, and but in a couple of in my a couple of films I did before Willow, and then in a book I wrote, and including a little bit in Willow, I'm in dialogue with what's real, what is not, and how fiction and the documentary can work together, help each other. Um, there's no pure documentary film unless it's, Andy Warhol's Empire.
ah,
So um, I guess it's a long introduction in
Well, the argument against Empire is that he still chose what to frame.
absolutely, and when to turn it on and off. Right. Anyway, the beginning of the second story, that's something that happened. Actually, there's quite a few things in the film that happened either to me or somebody told me the story. I would just write it down. And then, of course, you work on it, you change it, you develop it, or you even keep it as is. Sometimes it's copy paste. But like the opening of the second story, the the traffic accident, the rain, um, the ambulance comes and picks up the guy, the girl and her mother watching from the balcony, and the police are not showing up because they're watching football. That's something that happened to a friend of mine. Down to her mother's calling the police and saying, "What are you guys doing? Why don't you come and do your job?" So that whole thing was something that happened. Then I guess the trick is how do you develop a whole new world based on something that happened, a whole new world of fiction. And it felt like a great starting point for two characters for their life after that, for like the whatever 5 years after this encounter. And actually the finale, when little Kira to see goes to the neighbor's circumcision celebration, to his little Roma neighbor, is also something that happened to a friend of mine who's actually now a shrink in New York City.
That particular scene is very entertaining, and also the relationship between the two kids, where you finally get him to open up and to speak and all of that. Um,
Yeah.
how what was your source of inspiration for the child that really just does not want to interact with anyone, and then finally, like, sort of the psychology of where that comes from, and how they
Yeah.
develop a sense of being able to, or desire to communicate.
Well, that was all constructed based on research, on talking to people who work with children, on people who work with adoption agencies and adoption services. And that came from the dramaturgical need of the film, of the third story, where I wanted this sense of danger, sense of trauma, which makes us feel as if we're going to end up in um, something bad, something sad, and then things change. So that was a very specific need that the story had at this late point in the script. And then I just said, and that was probably the part of the film where I spent most time and energy getting right, fine tuning it. Um, and we worked on it until very late, actually.
What were some of
Until
the things that you struggled with the most that you changed?
um, I didn't want people to think that he's autistic.
Mhm.
I wanted people to feel that he might be, that there may be a danger that he's going to be autistic, and that's what his mother is worried about. But I also didn't want people to feel like that would be a tragedy. And she's very accepting, and she says, a kid is there to be loved, regardless of how he turns out. So even though she probably would prefer if he were not autistic, in the end, it's not like she would reject this child for that reason. So there was ambiguity in the whole thing, and he was trying to strike the right moment. And a lot of it is not big drama. It's not um, the type of drama you see in the first story or in the second story. It's much more internal. And that was the danger. It's like, how do you make that convincing, particularly at this late point in the story, when people have already gone through an hour and a half of film, and um, they frankly want a resolution.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Your filmmaking is so complex between playing with the sort of presentation of time, doing juxtapositions and really weaving the sort of tapestry of these three stories, that I think it would be interesting for our screenwriting students to understand a little bit about um, how you do put it all together. I mean, you've talked about drawing inspiration from real life and having, making sure that you're acutely aware of things around you that you're writing down and taking inspiration from folklore. But when you actually set out to um, craft a screenplay, what are the building blocks for you, and how do you put them together?
Well, I start um, with a plot complication that is intriguing, that will make the person you're talking to say, "And what happened next?" Or say, "Wow, I didn't expect that." And this could be just one sentence. It could be, usually is just one sentence or one paragraph. And once you have that, the next thing I need is the taste of the film. Is it a film where you're expecting something to break, where you spend the film in sort of an expectation, or is it a film where bad things happen, but then by the end you have a feeling that's somewhat elating? Um, so the second thing is the feeling. Once I have those two, and if it feels like the film could go somewhere, then I just sit down and write the story. And it's usually 4 or 5 pages, or it could be as little as one page, as short as one page. And it's like the complication and the resolution. And it's not linear. The writing is non-linear. You can write something and then come in and drop things here and drop things at the beginning. So it doesn't have to be really finished. I feel good when I'm writing. I feel comfortable. It probably comes from being so immersed in comic books when I was growing up, and books. But like in comic books, it's all plot, and sometimes it's repetitive, but that teaches you. It's like playing etudes on the piano. You learn what works and what doesn't. So um, the next stage then is developing it to this like short story, which is 4 or 5 pages, and then you feel whether there is a film here or not. And if there is a film, then I let it sit, I let it ripen. I don't write anything except for little ideas that I jot down and just put in a folder. And when the thing is ripe, could be a few months, could be a year or two, I take all of those little ideas plus this 5-page story and write the script. So I don't do a treatment or anything in between. So I jump from the short story to the script. Um, and if it's ripe, if it's ready to go, for me, it's a very short, very quick process. It's writing the script is about 2 weeks. Um, and I take liberties with that. It's sometimes you wanted to do one thing in the synopsis, but the story goes somewhere else. The character refuses to die. It's like, I'm okay, fine, let's try that. Let's just try things, because you can always go back and erase it. That's the great thing. But trying things out gives you that sense of creative freedom and that sense of just freedom, which I find essential to making a work of art. So it's like, just play with it, let it go a certain direction. Usually, I'd say 8 out of 10. It's a good idea to just go where you didn't expect you were going to go.
Is the film, is the finished film, does that still resemble that sort of 4 to 5 page story version, or was
Very
there?
much so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very much so. both the structure and, I mean, of course, there's a lot of details that are going to change in between, and a lot of important details which are going to make the story more believable and deeper and richer. But in spite of all this playfulness along the way, it doesn't change all that much. I'm trying to remember. Maybe on Dust it did change quite a lot. On this one, the thing that changed was that part 3 grew out of the other 2 parts, and I feel it made the film much more complex. So that was between the 4 or 5 pages and the finished script.
When you have that sort of ability to sort of play with the timeline or the chronology in the second and third part, do you also leave some room for discovering some of that in the editing, or does it match pretty much exactly how you would see it?
I'm happy to leave it for the edit room, because actually, I mean, that's where you write your final draft. Your final draft you write in the editing room just by moving one scene from here to here and dropping a character and speeding up the end. You've rewritten your script.
Right.
Um, and I do some of that, and the cumulative effect is probably important, but there's nothing huge that I do in the editing. On Willow, at one point I was toying with the idea of putting what now is the first story, what always was the first story, in the middle, which had its advantages, but ultimately I felt that it was better to stay this way, where you start sort of simple and then things get more complex and more complex.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I feel like that that would have been somehow more jarring because it's such a leap back into the past.
Yeah.
Did you?
And then you go back to the contemporary moment, and you're like, oh, it's the same characters. So there, it would have been jarring, would have been interesting. I think that what today is the first story, if you put it in the middle, it just doesn't have the same kind of energy. And if it's in the middle, it would have sagged a little.
So, I mean, removing certain considerations like your need to, to do the sound mix and all of that. If you were to take, did you try, like, actually just sort of moving that section in and having a real look at it, or was that more sort of conceptually?
Good question. I think we did have a screening when we did that. Uh, it was among the first screenings. It was the first screening, and it felt like, the film starts with a bang, and a lot of things happen. And then you go into the medieval story, which is much more linear and more sort of simple, and it was longer. So you didn't have the build up that the film has in its current form. I also really like the transition between 1 and 2,
Yeah.
and that we would have lost.
So, just to ask a couple of quick questions about the film's release. Um, tell us a little bit about the situation that Macedonia is in terms of its own cinema, because this film will, of course, have a global appeal, and there's sometimes a little bit of I don't know if it's tension between the domestic and the international audience. Uh,
Yeah, that's a big thing.
tell us about what Macedonians feel when the people that you've spoken to that have seen the film.
Well, it did extremely well. I mean, it was the best attended film. It broke
Yeah.
a bunch of records, theatrical and TV records. It opened just before the pandemic hit.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay,
we had,
great. So you got an opportunity to have this in theaters.
yeah. So we had a chance to have a nice long theatrical run, beat all the Marvel films when it opened. Um, it's interesting because the taste is different,
Mm,
and what people see in the films is different.
right.
Um, and I'm because ever since my first film played well internationally and played well domestically, I've been sort of people pick apart what you do and talk about it, which is great. I mean, as an artist, that you want that, but it's sometimes it goes to bizarre lengths. Like, oh, I saw that corner and it didn't look like that in real life, and the way you put it in the film. Um, it's it's about a small place seeing itself on the big screen, and the identification people have with what they see on the big screen, and they think, oh, this is how I'm going to be seen globally. I would like to be seen differently. I would like not to have bags under my eyes, and I'd like to have less white in my hair. Um, Metaphorically speaking,
Sure.
about society. It's like, what are you showing? And also the detail and the political detail is so important to people in Macedonia.
Mm,
Global audience is interested in learning about Macedonia, but I believe most viewers are really interested in seeing a story that touches them, that makes them feel a certain way, makes them think about things. And those things are not necessarily about politics or about geography.
mm,
You know, it's not CNN, it's not National Geographic. So this film, I mean, it actually, the reactions are quite similar in this particular case, which wasn't always the case. People in Macedonia, there was an outpouring of feelings about the film. People, wrote about it or talked about it. They would come up to me, and I traveled with the film a little bit before the pandemic. It opened in Rome, then played Tallinn, then played Golden Horse in Taipei, and I spoke with the audience, and you could see that they were emotionally with the characters, with the film. Then the pandemic hit, and we just like basically sort of set on the film for a long time, and now it's picking up again. And now it has US distribution this year, which is great. So yeah, it's
which company? What can we
it's
see?
Kino Lorber picked it up. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this film in particular is one that's so beautiful and cinematic that you really hope that we'll get a chance to put it up on a big screen.
It was conceived for I mean, sometimes when it will be seen a certain way, you do your blocking and how you shoot it and how you light it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there, I guess, is there anything about the film? This is of course like a film school type analysis where you want to sort of allegorize everything. But is there anything specifically about the film that you think speaks about Macedonia itself?
Um, I'm sure there is, but um, I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, um, I try to be true to facts,
Mhm.
but that's not why I make the films I make. Um, and I hope that people will understand them and like them or hate them, regardless of how much they know about Macedonia or about where the film comes from. In this particular case, the relationships and the social points were all well researched, and we stand behind them. But that's not why the film was made. So in a way, it's hopefully it goes beyond that. But yeah, I mean, it is a snapshot of Macedonia in 2019, 2018. It's of how as seen by us, the filmmakers.
Just one last thing, because we're getting to a point where a lot of Academy voting is starting to happen, and this is this amazing period of time where we get access to films from all over the world. And I'm curious to know what that experience has been like this year, considering all of the uncertainty, the different rules. What's been going on with you in the film in the context of it being the official entry from Macedonia?
Oh, well, a lot of things. Um, I mean, one, it's the pandemic and how people see the film, and the deadlines change and everything. Two, we were selected by the Macedonian Association of Filmmakers quite late in the game, so didn't have that much time to work on presenting it to the Academy audience. And then it's a whole industry, and it's quite complex, and it's expensive, and a lot of really highly motivated people who know what they're doing are handling it, are doing it, and frankly, we're quite small in that whole game. And as I'm in almost in pre-production on the next film, I'm in this blessed situation where I don't have to worry so much about how the film does, but I can spend most of my time thinking about this next one.
Um, is there anything you can share about what you're working on now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a black comedy. Um, it's called kaymak, and kaymak is a Turkish word that basically means cream. It's this thing that it's a savory cheese. It's halfway between butter and cheese, and it tastes great. Um,
That sounds
and and it's a story of two couples, a rich couple and a poor couple, who live next to each other, and they almost don't know about each other's existence, and they both get involved in unorthodox romantic setups. They both get involved in threesomes at the same time, and then things get complicated. So it's it's um, it's a funny comedy. It's a funny tragedy, I should say. Actually, it's a funny tragedy.
well, I hope that when it's done, we can have a chance to speak to you again. Um, but in the meantime, best wishes for the Oscar campaign. And I really hope that there's a way for more people here in the United States to get a chance to see the film. And we'll definitely be on the lookout for the kino release. So thank you very much. And I know it's late
Very
over
welcome.
there. I really look forward to your next film as well. So be safe. Uh, good luck writing, and
Thank you.
have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Great talking to you.
Same here.
Thank you.
Night.